All right, baby, it is week one. Chris Hassel joined by the OG of Power Rankings, Pete Prisco, here to rank every NFL team 1 to 32 before the week. You ready?
You know what? I'm looking on Twitter, and boy, they hate me. They absolutely hate me. No matter what you do, Power Rankings, they hate you.
People love to hate Power Rankings.
They really do. And since I'm the godfather of the Power Rankings.
Yes, you are.
Way back in the day.
He invented the Power
Ranking.
I did. Let's start with the top 10 from Pete Prisco. No surprise at the top, it's the Buffalo Bills. We're going to get Pete's explanation for many of these as we go on throughout the next half hour or so. The Chiefs are 3. The Super Bowl teams last year, Rams, Bengals, round out the top 5. Saints are high at 6, ahead of the Buccaneers at 7. 49ers with Trey Lance rounding out the top 10. Going into the teens in Pete Prisco's Week 1 Power Rankings, the Colts at 11. The Titans were the 1 seed in the AFC last season. They're 14. Cowboys way down at 15. And how about the Arizona Cardinals? Won 11 games last year. They're way down at 19. That would not be playoff position. A look at the rest of the Power Rankings, according to Pete Prisco. You can find the whole list on CBSSports.com. Last place, that would be the Atlanta Falcons, who somehow won 7 games last season. But no more Matt Ryan. Marcus Mariota is the quarterback. They are dead last. All right, so Pete Prisco is here with his Power Rankings. We also have Ryan Wilson joining us as well. Ryan's going to piggyback off your explanations, Pete. Let's start with the Buffalo Bills at 1. I've got a question for you. If you could have the Bills or every other team in the AFC to win the conference, who would you take?
Oh, I take every other team in the AFC. I think the AFC is loaded. I mean, there's a lot of really good teams in the AFC. I mean, you start in the West, any one of those teams will be could be a deep playoff team. I think the Bengals are going to be in the mix again.
But why do you like the Bills more than any other team right now?
Because they're the best team and deep and talented. It's a passers and pass rusher league. And when you look at this team, they can throw it. You know they can. And I think they're going to be more like they played against the Chiefs this year in the playoffs this year than they were before. Because Sean McDermott likes to run the ball, but he realizes he's got special quarterback and he's got special receivers around him. Gabriel Davis, by the way, for fantasy people out there, is going to have a monster year. But it's the pass rushers. They went out and got Von Miller, but they have waves of guys. It's 8 deep. And they're going to run those guys in at the quarterback. And it always comes down to, just like it did in their loss to the Chiefs, sack, fumble, game over. If they get a sack against the Chiefs, they win the thing. And I think they go and win the whole thing.
Some would say it came down to the coin toss, but
no,
that's not exactly true.
It came down to 13 seconds that they blew the game. That's what it came down to.
Certainly did. Ryan, you have the Bills as your number 1 team as well?
Yeah, no, I agree with Pete on that. And Pete and I were at the Bills training camp about a month ago now, and I actually asked him at the time, any concerns about all these expectations on the Bills? Because typically this time of year, the expectations are on the Chiefs, historically been on the Patriots, and obviously both those teams were able to handle the expectations. The Bills didn't quite handle the expectations in that final game, the 13 seconds game that we're talking about, but they outplayed the Chiefs for 59 minutes and change, and perhaps even into some of that overtime. But I think Pete's right, and this feels maybe not quite a layup because, as Pete noted, the AFC is absolutely stacked. But when you start with Josh Allen, they've improved the offensive line. You talk about all the playmakers, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir, who they drafted, Dawson Knox, James Cook, who they drafted in the second round. And then you look at that defense, and they're not even going to have Tre'Davious White for that first game, and that will probably have some implications in terms of what the line looks like. But when he gets back, that's a shutdown defense as well. Never mind the front 7 that Pete has already talked about. Kyrie Elam, the rookie, has played really well in training camp and preseason. So the team checks every box. Sean McDermott's one of the best coaches. Brandon Beane's one of the best GMs. It goes on and on. It's hard to argue that this isn't the best team in football right now.
And Josh Allen is the preseason favorite to win MVP. The number 2 team in Pete's Power Rankings is the team that has the 2-time defending MVP champion. That would be Aaron Rodgers. Question is, are you confident enough in his pass catchers?
I am, because I think great quarterbacks will make good receivers. They're not going to be great. They're going to be good. But this isn't about Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not worried about him. I know people out there are a little concerned. I'm not. But this is about the other side of the ball. In his time in Green Bay, they haven't been dominant on defense. This defense has a chance to be dominant. And I'm talking across the board. If their secondary stays healthy, it's arguably the best secondary in the NFL. You're talking about 3 corners that can all play and 2 safeties that are both really good. Rashawn Gary's on the verge of being a dominant edge rusher. Kenny Clark on the interior is really good. They've added some pieces with the 2 kids from Georgia. Walker, the linebacker, will start. So you add it all up, and this is going to be a dominant defense early to get Rodgers acclimated to his pass catchers. And the offensive line, by the way, Bakhtiari will be back, Jenkins will be back. They're going to be dominant up front as well. This is a good, talented team, and the pass catchers are concerned, but don't worry about him. He'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, will he figure it out, though, Pete? That's the thing, because we know Aaron Rodgers gets frustrated when guys aren't where they're supposed to be, especially young guys who don't have a lot of experience in that system. And Aaron Rodgers, when he wants to play, he can absolutely light it up. But we've also seen Aaron Rodgers in big games where by halftime the Packers are out of it in the regular season. He'll just sort of pack it in for the third and fourth quarter. We've seen that. That's not me just making up stories about Aaron Rodgers. And that's my concern. If the pass catchers are frustrating Aaron Rodgers because they're not where they're supposed to be, they're dropping balls, and that was the case throughout training camp and preseason, especially with Romeo Doubs out of Nevada, who had an otherwise great campaign in August. Those are the concerns for me. But you're right about the defense, and maybe it's a situation where finally the defense will help out Aaron Rodgers to the point where they can win scoring 17 points or 20 points a game. But I'm not comfortable putting Green Bay number 2 in a list, as we just talked about moments ago, how incredibly stacked the AFC is. I like Green Bay. I like them a lot in the NFC. I don't love them this high.
AFC has gone through Kansas City for the majority of the last 4 or 5 years. They start at number 3 in your power rankings. Feels like this is really the first time that we do have some question marks for Patrick Mahomes on offense.
Well, I think without Tyreek Hill, you're going to see them have to adjust. I mean, when you have a deep threat like he is and what he can bring to an offense, teams have to play you differently. And now, how do they compensate for that? But I'm a big believer in Patrick Mahomes. I'm a big believer in Andy Reid. I think they're 2 of the best in the business at what they do. They'll figure it out, and they have enough guys. I mean, I think Valdez-Scantling, who a guy I've really liked for a long time, can fly. He'll give him that dimension. Juju Smith-Schuster in the middle of the field will give him that. We know Travis Kelce's going to get his ball. I'm not concerned so much about the offense. Where I think the Chiefs have to show that they can be a different team is rushing the passer. You know, Frank Clark didn't have a great year last year. Cut out alcohols, trimmed down, looks better. George Karlaftis, the rookie from Purdue, will be a really good player, unlike what Ryan thought before the draft. I got to get my shot in at Ryan before the draft. And so I think when you look at this, this team will be right back in the mix again. They're the best team in the AFC West.
Ryan, rebuttal?
No, Trey McDuffie's going to be good. Pete knows I liked him as well. I wasn't as high on George Karlaftis, but he actually had a really good preseason as well. He hasn't played a ton of football, and I think Pete's right. He's going to provide some depth coming off the edge. L'Jarius Sneed, who played well as a rookie a few years ago, has a rebound year. They signed Justin Reed. That's also a guy to keep an eye on in the back end there. This isn't going to be the Packers defense, a team we just talked about, but offensively they'll be better. And Tyreek Hill is going to be a huge loss and a big gain for Tua Tagovailoa in Miami. And the question is, how do you work around that? Is Juju Smith-Schuster number 1? No, clearly he's not. But he's got to play like it at times in order to make up some of that slack. They drafted Sky Moore. He was okay in the preseason, but he's not going to come in right away and provide a lot of production in terms of what was lost in Tyreek Hill. But again, and Pete noted this, you have Andy Reid, you have Patrick Mahomes. That's a pretty good starting point to build an organization around. I'll say this, though. I'll go on the record before Pete steals my take on this as well. I think the Chargers might win the division. I might have them here as opposed to the Chiefs. They're really close, and that division is going to be incredibly tough. But I'm hopping on the Chargers bandwagon because this, fingers crossed, is the year that they're able to figure it out and get to the playoffs.
Pete has the Chargers 9th. We'll get to them and some other teams in just a little bit. Let's round out the top 5 with the 2 teams that matched up in the Super Bowl. I haven't done the research on your power rankings, but I'm going to guess that there haven't been many years where the following year the 2 Super Bowl teams aren't in the top 3. It's not just you. I mean, the Vegas odds makers are saying the same thing.
Yeah, and again, I think when people look at the Bengals and where they were, I think they thought that as a surprise. I think the Bengals are going to be really good, don't get me wrong. I just think now you're the hunted. You haven't dealt with that role yet. That's another experience for a young team. They'll be good. I think they'll win their division, but can they be the same type of team they were a year ago? I think they might even be better, but better in terms of protecting the quarterback. We can see that they've had problems with that. How many spinning tops did their linemen get last year? And I think they'll be better from an offensive standpoint, and I think they're going to be good defensively. But it's being the hunted. You're different. It's a different way to approach teams, a different way to approach the season. As for the Rams, I think the Rams have to show me that they can get another pass rusher going. You know, losing Von Miller, that was huge. He didn't play great in the regular season, but he came on in the postseason just like you expect him to do. So they have to show that they can get another edge rusher. They're going to be good. I just don't think they're going to be a dominant team.
Right.
Yeah, with the Bengals, I think this is all about Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow is not Andy Dalton. Yes, Andy Dalton got the Bengals to 5 straight playoff appearances starting with his rookie season. But Joe Burrow was able to get to the playoffs and win a playoff game for the first time in franchise history. And that team, you could argue, should have won the Super Bowl with the way they played. But as Pete noted, the offensive line just couldn't stand up to what the Rams were bringing. They went out, they fixed the offensive line. They saw, maybe one of the most underrated signings, by the way, is Ted Karras, who's playing center. He's already been named team captain. They'll have a rookie Cordell Volson starting at left guard. Of course, they have La'el Collins. And I think this group, the front five in front of Joe Burrow, is going to be probably the most important unit on this team as we go through the season. Defense is young, fast, physical. Jesse Bates is playing on that franchise tag with something to prove. I think they're going to be unconcerned about the expectations weighing on them as the team that went to the Super Bowl in the AFC. The Rams, meanwhile, I think Pete's right. Whitworth retired. They have to replace the left side. No Boone will move over there. We'll see what happens. Von Miller's gone. What's the edge rush situation going to look like? They lost some depth at wide receiver. Robert Woods is gone. They signed Allen Robinson. We'll see. And they have Cooper Kupp, who we all know is a little bit better than Hunter Renfrow.
I mean, he has to go there every time. I mean, it's amazing every single time. You know, the thing about the Bengals that is a little concerning, and you mentioned Joe Burrow. I was there about 3 weeks ago, and I didn't talk to him because he wasn't available, but I saw him walk through the locker room. He looked frail, really frail. I mean, after the appendectomy. So, and later we found out that it was, a rupture.
He needs to go on your fat ball diet.
Yeah, he does. He needs to gain some weight during the season.
Get on that Pete Prisco
well,
fat
no, my
ball
doctor
diet.
told me get off the fat ball diet.
Let's move now to a surprise. I think the biggest surprise at the top 10 here is that Pete has the Saints over the Buccaneers. Saints at 6, Bucs at 7. Why?
And Ryan's going to say I copied his paper because he liked the Saints before I did. Not that I didn't like them, but going there and spending time around that team and talking to their players, that defense is going to be violent and nasty. And remember, they shut out Tampa Bay last year. They limited Aaron Rodgers to 3 points last year, and they're even better. And the guy they're all raving about is coming off the weird injury with the finger amputation is Marcus Davenport. They're talking about him being the best defensive player on the team this year. Now, think about that for a second, because Cam Jordan plays on that same line. You know, Honey Badger's on that defense. Marshawn Latimer's on that defense. Demario Davis is on that defense. They're going to be so much better on defense this year, and I think that's going to carry them early on. There's one caveat to the whole thing. Does Jameis Winston not turn the ball over? Through his career, he's been a guy that turned the ball over. Sean Payton kind of got it out of him last year before he got hurt. I think this group will try and minimize what he does. He's got to go through his progressions. He's got to get the ball out, and he has to be able to take the check down. Every coach who's ever coached Jameis Winston has told me if he can't be a hero in every play. You have to take the check down. So if he does that, Kamara looks like a guy from 2 years ago. It's going to be a really good team.
They were 5-2 with Jameis as the starter last season, Ryan.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about Michael Thomas hopefully coming back and being able to contribute after missing last season. Chris Olave, their first-round pick, as well, is going to contribute. Trevor Penning, who was also the first-round pick, won't play for a while. He hurt his toe, so they have to figure out the left tackle position in terms of structure there in a post-Teron Armstead world. But something to talk about, and Pete noted with Marcus Davenport and how people are high on him. Don't forget, when he was drafted, the Saints traded up for him, and there was a lot of grumbling that perhaps they overdrafted him. And sometimes these players take some time to develop. And if it comes true that he ends up being the best player on that defense, it's going to be worth the wait. I think with the good news with Jameis Winston is we saw glimpses last year that he was able to rein in all the harebrained plays that led to turnovers. Now, Sean Payton's obviously gone, but Pete Carmichael's still there dialing up the plays, and I think that's going to be something that Jameis can lean on in addition to all those other playmakers. I love this. I think Pete's 6, it doesn't feel too high to me, and I'm concerned about where Tom Brady is above the neck in terms of competing as he has done throughout the last 20 years in terms of the Buccaneers being one of the best teams in the NFL.
One quick thing on the Saints. Their top 3 their top 3 receivers from a year ago are now 4, 5, and 6 on the roster.
As they should be, right?
Right. I mean, they were good players, but now you have Michael Thomas coming back. You have Olave, like you mentioned, and you have Jarvis Landry. I mean, it's a better group, and it's going to make it easier on Jameis Winston.
Okay, let's round out the top 10 now with a trio of teams with young quarterbacks, really young quarterbacks. Eagles with Jalen Hurts, Chargers with Justin Herbert, and the 49ers with Trey Lance.
Yeah, when I look at the Eagles, I think they're the best of this group. I think that roster's deep and talented. And I'm talking about you can go into their second group and still have good players, so they'll be able to withstand injuries. And I know everybody says it's all about Jalen Hurts. Well, the thing for Jalen Hurts is going through his progressions. Can he get from 1 to 2 to 3? He didn't do it last year. It was 1 and get out and run. You can't play like that. Well, having seen them down in Miami, and watch their practice and talk to people around them, last year the coaches complained about him every single day, supposedly, during practice. Not going through his reads, not going through his progressions. This year, none.
Really?
He's that much better going through his reads and progressions. And if he's good, they're going to be really good. I think they win the division. Herbert's going to put up amazing numbers. Defensively, they're going to be better. Something about the Chargers, though. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like my dad says, the young guy that goes for it on 4th down. He has a different way of saying it. I won't repeat what he says. But, I think the Chargers have good talent, but I just am concerned that they can get over the hump.
Yeah, obviously I would have the Chargers a little higher. I'm with you on the Eagles. It is all about Jalen Hurts, but that team, the way they're constituted, it's hard not to like them in that division and in terms of making playoff run. I think Nick Sirianni learned a lot after the first month of last season where he just wanted to throw the ball 50 times a game, and then he understood the balance that was necessary, and Jalen Hurts has improved. I'm interested about the Trey Lance thing, Pete. I don't know where he's going to be. He has the greatest play caller in the game helping him out. I get that, but I do wonder, we'll talk about this soon, I'm sure, but I love the Raiders. I love the Ravens, even like the Broncos a little bit, and you like the 49ers better than those teams.
Well, the 49ers are loaded from a roster standpoint. This is a league of stars, and when you look at that team, they have stars. Samuel's a star, Kittle's a star, Bosa's a star. It's a team of stars, and they have one of the best head coaches in the league. I am concerned about Trey Lance. I talked to some people in Minnesota when we were there. They watched him practice for 2 days, and they played him. And some of the guys I talked to said they're not so sure about Trey Lance. So it'll be interesting to see how he responds. I think bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back is a hedge. They're hedging their bets. They're worried about Trey Lance. So it'll be interesting to see, but the roster is loaded.
All right, that's Pete Prisco's top 10 in our Week 1 power rankings as we get set to kick off the 2022 season. Ryan mentioned several teams like the Ravens, the Broncos, who you do not find here in the top 10. We'll see where they land on the other side. We are going through Pete Prisco's power rankings, and we're going to do it each and every Tuesday. All right, we're getting into the meat of Pete Prisco's power rankings now. Chris Hassel, there's Pete. Ryan is with us as well via satellite. The Colts are at number 11, Pete. That's pretty high. You must be a believer in Matt Ryan making a big difference for this team.
I've always been a believer in Matt Ryan. I think he's one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks who's played the game. And up until last year, he had thrown for 4,000 yards. I think it was 8 straight seasons. That was a record. And he missed it by, I think, 3 yards. He'll be back in that 4,000-yard area again. I know this is a team that wants to run the ball with Jonathan Taylor, but Matt Ryan can make big plays down the field. People say, well, what about the receivers? I think Pittman's going to have a good year, but I think Alec Pierce is really going to have a good year. By the second half of the season, he's going to take off and be a big part of their offense. And defensively, they have a lot of good young players, and Gus Bradley is a good defensive coordinator. They're the team to beat the division. I know people will say, well, until you beat the Titans, prove it. Well, I think they're going to beat the Titans and be the better team in that division.
Yeah, Ryan, Pete has him not only above the Titans, but above some teams that you've mentioned as being potential top 10 teams like the Ravens and Broncos, even Raiders.
No, I like them to win that division as well. And the math that it comes down to for me, is Matt Ryan and Jonathan Taylor versus Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. Who are you taking? And I'm going to take the former. But Pete sort of stole my joke there. He does love Matt Ryan, and to the point that he has his team 11th. But here's the thing. If you listen to the folks that he's throwing the passes to, specifically Michael Pittman, he can only say great things about how much Matt Ryan has transformed this offense. No disrespect at all to Carson Wentz, but how much things have changed over 12 months has sort of revitalized what that offense was supposed to be. Obviously, as Pete noted, it's going to go through Jonathan Taylor, but you have someone like Matt Ryan back there who's been in the league since 2008, should have won that Super Bowl, has played at a high level. It makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't have them quite this high, but I think they're going to win the division, and they're certainly one of the better teams in the top half of the NFL. And 11, 15, 16, I think you're splitting hairs at that point.
He is so nice. I mean, it's amazing. No disrespect to Carter. You just blast him. What do you mean, no disrespect? Take the man's hat off. It's total disrespect.
He saw what happened to that poor bastard in local TV in D.C. that was just blistering Wentz with those questions. Yeah. Hey, I hear you're terrible. Is that true?
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Cowboys at 15. It's pretty low for a 12-win team last year.
Yeah, it is low, and there's some concerns. Tyron Smith not being there is a big deal to me. And if you go back and look at how they've played when he hasn't been there, they haven't played very well. And so I think that's a glaring hole in the offensive line. And they had all kinds of problems on the offensive line last year. Where the receiver situation is in flux as well. CeeDee Lamb is there, but then who? Gallup's hurt. They have all kinds of issues there. So I added it all up, and I thought the Eagles were the better team in the division. I think the Cowboys will push to get 9 wins, maybe sneak in the back end if they have a good, successful season and they can handle the left tackle spot.
If they don't, though, McCarthy out, you think?
Mike's out. He'll be done. And Sean Payton. The only thing about Sean Payton, though, is he want to work for Jerry.
Yeah, here's the thing. You want me to say something that's not nice? This is as far as I'm willing to go. I have huge concerns about Mike McCarthy, and I've had those concerns since the moment he was hired in Dallas. And he hasn't done a whole lot to change my opinion, given how that season ended last year on that 4th and 18 or whatever it was, and or 3rd and 18, and had Dak Prescott doing the quarterback sneak. Again, questions. And Pete, you've talked about everything else. The wide receivers are concerned after CeeDee Lamb. Michael Gallup's coming off that ACL. The offensive line's a huge issue. Their left tackle is 40 years old. Fantastic player, future Hall of Famer. But do you want a 40-year-old protecting Dak Prescott? We'll see if Zeke can get back to being what Zeke is. But running game, the amount you're paying Zeke Elliott, I don't know if that's how you want to feature that offense. Micah Parsons is fantastic. They do have some players on defense, but perhaps not enough. 15, that means you're an average team, and I think that's about right. I think 9 wins, 9.5 wins is probably where the Cowboys are at. If they can sort out the offensive line, they'll win more games, but that's a big if, and that's the most important part of that team, and right now it's in flux.
One of our games coming up this Sunday to kick off the season on CBS, the Dolphins and the Patriots. You've got the Dolphins ranked ahead of the Patriots in your power rankings. The Dolphins at 18, Patriots at 22.
If Bill Belichick gets this group to the postseason, it will be one of the greatest coaching jobs he's ever done in his history.
So is this group worse than last year's group?
Yes. I don't think, and that team made the playoffs.
Right, I know, that's what I'm saying.
I don't think this team is very good. You look at the talent across the board, and it's just not there. Okay, the offensive line, they'll get around that. The receivers, it's a group of guys. The running game should be okay. Defensively, they have a bunch of no-namers on that defense. I mean, they're going to have to really manufacture a pass rush. So I'm concerned about the New England Patriots. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not one of those guys that gets an overreaction to the preseason because I'm like Belichick. The preseason doesn't matter one bit. Nothing. Not at all. And so I do think that they're going to be behind Miami. Miami can be a really good team if Tua is a really good team. Now, that's a big if. All we heard all summer was great things about Tua coming out of there. Oh my gosh, Mike McDaniel, great. Tyreek Hill, great. Until now it's game time. Now go show us. Go show us. Because he had that good game against the Eagles in the preseason and everybody went nuts. The Eagles didn't scheme up anything. It's an entirely different animal. So let's see what he does in the regular season. If he has a good year, they're going to be good. If he doesn't, he'll be looking for a job next year.
Pete, I'm with you about the Dolphins being ranked higher than the Patriots. I think the Patriots defense is actually pretty good and maybe even really good, and they're going to have to be because for as much as I love Mac Jones, I don't know what this offense is going to look like in large part because Josh McDaniels is now in Las Vegas and Matt Patricia appears to be sort of calling the plays. It didn't look good in the preseason, so hopefully what you like to say that the preseason doesn't matter, that applies to the play calling that Matt Patricia was doing because that has to improve. As for Tua, look, man, I bought into that Eagles game. I was really impressed with how his arm looked stronger, and that has nothing to do with the scheme. He was making throws on time and accurately. That has nothing to do with scheme. So those are positives you can take away. Now, look, did Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill go overboard in their praise of Tua? Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose that's better than what Antonio Brown likes to do and bring down his teammates. So that's a positive, but it all is going to go through Tua. I think the good news is that Mike McDaniel is a run game, the coordinator from San Francisco, so he'll lean on that, and that will take some of the pressure off Tua. But at the end of the day, I think the Dolphins have a much better chance of going to the playoffs than the Patriots, which, as you know, that team somehow found their way to the playoffs a year ago.
Continuing on with Pete Prisco's power rankings, and you have some teams muddled up around 25, 26, 27 that are poised to take a step forward this season. They're still in the bottom 10, but Jaguars, Texans, Lions, optimistic.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic on all three. Not so much for this year, for next year. And I'll start with the Jaguars. I mean, look, their defense is going to be really good this year. They're going to be good on defense. You know, Walker and Allen will give them two good pass rushers. Allen will probably break out and get back to what he was as a rookie on one side now that he has some help on the other. The defensive line is going to be physical and tough. They can run at linebacker, and the secondary is going to be good. And I think Trevor Lawrence is going to take a step forward. Why? Because he's got a real NFL coach. He's got Doug Peterson. The guy has skins on the wall. He won a Super Bowl, and he handles things like a pro, unlike the last guy. So it's going to be much better for them. They're going to be improved. They'll win 6 games, maybe 7, and then next year they'll be much better. I'm a big believer in Davis Mills as far as the Texans. I think they're going to be feisty and tough and better than people think. Davis Mills and Nico Collins will be a good pass combination this year. Keep an eye on for that. And then as far as when you talk about some of those other teams, you talk about the Lions, they're going to be feisty and physical and tough. Their offensive line might be one of the better ones in the league, and they'd like Jared Goff. I just don't know if they're going to be good enough rushing the passer. You know, Hutchinson's got to come up really big for them, and they have some other questions on defense. Next year, watch out for the Lions.
Right?
Yeah, I actually might put the Lions a little higher, but I agree with the teams that Pete has mentioned. The Texans outplayed every terrible team last year in terms of how hard they worked, and the Lions were probably right behind them. The Jaguars probably gave up by week 4 or 5, and you understand why given that coaching situation. But all 3 teams have sort of been revitalized. But for me, perhaps the none more so than the Lions. Maybe watching Hard Knocks had something to do with that, and I told you so today, Hassel, when I was on. I don't know if Dan Campbell is a genius in terms of X's and O's, but he certainly gets those guys motivated. He's a former player. He's a former meathead former player, so they can sort of buy into that. Pete noted they like Jared Goff, and Jared Goff played really well last year given the circumstances. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a pleasant surprise. They have Josh Reynolds. They have T.J. Hockenson. Pete talked about the offensive line. Hutch needs to step up. Jeff Okudah needs to play like a first-round pick, and he's had some glimpses of that in the preseason. That has to translate. They're not winning the division, but if you told me that the Lions or the Jags won 7 games, maybe snuck to 8 games, I think that's a huge victory in terms of 1 year out from what last year was. And then going forward next season, one of those 2 teams, I think is going to have a chance to make the playoffs.
The 2 New York, New Jersey teams, 28 and 29. The Giants just ahead of the Jets. The last place team in your power rankings, the Atlanta Falcons. So the fall from totally blowing the Super Bowl is complete, all the way from should have been won to last.
Well, when you look at the roster, how many of those guys are actually around anymore, including the quarterback Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, who was a star receiver on those teams? They're not there anymore. And so the roster's been kind of overhauled. And I think they know that. When they got rid of Matt Ryan, they knew this was going to be a rebuild, and they're going to give Arthur Smith the chance to rebuild it. When you look at the talent on that team, though, it just isn't there. There isn't a lot there. I mean, like, you look at the running back position. Who's it going to be? Patterson? I mean, is he a legitimate running back? I mean, they have issues. Algier might end up being the running back down the stretch. So they have a lack of talent. I do love Kyle Pitts. I think he's going to be a star, but he's alone in that category. And Grady Jarrett, I feel bad for him on the defensive side of the ball.
That's bad when you're starting to feel bad for guys, Pete. I think, look, when we're talking about Tyler Algier being a really good football player, he reminds me of James Conner coming out of BYU. Your offense isn't very good if that's the point in the conversation. They did draft Drake London, who had a knee injury for a little bit of training camp. He should be ready to go at some point soon. Desmond Ridder was their 3rd-round pick. He played well in the preseason. We'll see how long until he gets on the field. Marcus Mariota last started the football game in 2019, I believe, so he hasn't played a ton of football consistently either. For me, though, the Falcons are terrible. But for me, and I hate to say this out loud to you, Hassel, the Bears might give them a run for their money because poor Justin Fields has nothing going for him offensively outside of David Montgomery. And I wonder how long he is for Chicago in terms of being upright, because he might take an absolute beating in terms of the lack of protection in front of him. And that team, for a lot of reasons, is not very good.
He just disrespected Darnell Mooney, didn't he?
He did.
He really did. And
From
Cole
what
Kmet,
I've heard from the Bears coaching staff is they've got weapons comparable to every team in the league.
Well, no, that's not true.
That's what the coaching
staff
is
you know what?
saying.
Darnell Mooney is a heck of a player, and Cole Kmet is going to be a heck of a tight end.
Yeah, Kmet, I've read a lot about him. Jamie Eisenberg and the guys have said he's a breakout player in fantasy this season.
But man, he didn't disrespect Carson Wentz, but he sure disrespected
He
Darnell
did. What's up
Mooney.
with
My
that?
God.
So those are Pete Prisco's power rankings. If you missed any of those, if you want to read more explanations as to why each team is where, check out CBS Sports.
Send me nasty stuff, because I know you will.
Tweet at Pete.
Tweet at Pete.
Tweet at Pete. That should be your Twitter handle. Pick Six podcast. I don't know what Wilson's been doing, but he hasn't been on the last 2 episodes. It's been Brinson and Breach breaking down win totals for every team in the league.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.